Hi everyone, I'm Stephen and welcome to Audio Nautica. And this series is my audio journey, looking at some of the special pieces of equipment that I've owned over the years that have been part of my journey in audio. And this is a fairly rare pair of Rogers compact monitors. I'll tell you later on how I came by these, but just to tell you about the history of the Rogers compact monitor. This came out of a desire from Rogers to come up with a derivative of the LS3/6, which was a BBC studio monitor built to BBC specifications, but because it was built to those specifications, it was fairly hamstrung in what it could be. It had to meet those specifications. So Rogers wanted to build something that captured the best of the LS3/6 but without being hamstrung by the BBC requirements. And so what came out of that was called the Rogers Export Monitor, designed, as the title might suggest, specifically for the export market. Now, out of the lessons that they learnt from the Rogers Export Monitor, they designed this, the Rogers Compact Monitor. So we see this as really, I guess, the second generation of speaker development originating from the LS3/6, designed to be an export monitor for domestic sort of use. So I'm going to start tearing this thing apart so that we can have a look inside. And as I'm doing so, I'll tell you about how I came along this particular set of speakers. Well, it was good old eBay. I had a specific need, which I won't bore you with, for another set of speakers, and I didn't want to pay a huge amount of money, and I just happened to see these on eBay. I think they were about $75, and I bought these. Oops, problem with the ply getting caught up on the screw there. I bought these in about 2011, I believe, and yeah, they were about $75, and they looked absolutely terrible. The veneer, the wood veneer, had it. It was all peeling off. So this is a new veneer, and one of them had a blown tweeter. But anyway, I set these things up on my home theatre. I put them in where the Polk Audio RT10s were, which I've covered in a previous video. And what I found was, even with one of these things having a blown tweeter, I kept on being drawn back to these. I kept on finding that I just preferred to listen to these. Now, they do have a very British sort of a sound, as one would expect, being a Rogers British speaker. So a very mellow, sweet sort of sound, and that's, I guess, what appealed to me so much about these things. So as I say, I just kept on finding myself being drawn back to them. It's not a pure sound, it's a very distinctive sort of sound. If you want a pure sound, these would not be for you. But yeah, I just really fell in love with that sweet, mellow British sound. And so these basically ended up permanently replacing my RT10s on my home theatre system. And these are still my main speakers on my home theatre system. I have a separate music system which uses the JBLs, but these are still the main fronts on my home theatre. So just before we have a look inside, I got very, very lucky, and I found a replacement tweeter. So here, this is the dead tweeter. So the tweeters are Audax. It's a HD 9x8 D25. So I got very, very lucky. I found a replacement. I think I paid $50 for the replacement. And so that got them going electrically. And then I had them re-veneered, and I think it cost me about $450 or so to have them re-veneered. So the tweeter is that Audax tweeter, and the driver is made by Daylesford. The cone is Bextreme, which I'm sure you can Google that just as well as I can. I think it's some sort of an early, remember these things were made, I think in the late 70s, so about 78, 79, something like that. So yeah, an early sort of, it's probably not strictly speaking a composite material, but you know, heading down those kind of lines. And yeah, so here we are basically looking at the entire guts of the speaker. So yeah, here's our bass driver. Yeah, so it does actually say on the back of it, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to turn it upside down or not. Okay, hopefully that's a little bit easier to read. The Rogers British High Fidelity Bass Loudspeaker, manufactured exclusively for Rogers by Daylesford Speakers Limited. So yeah, Daylesford driver. And I'll just bring you in just so you can have a closer look at the crossover. Okay, so there we are. And again, if you think back to those Polk Audio RT10s, and you think about the crossovers in those, and then compare these crossovers, you can see that it's really kind of like chalk and cheese. So yeah, a much nicer looking crossover, in my opinion anyway. And so that's what the crossover looks like, and I'll just show you, just move that over there, I'll just show you what the back of one of these speakers looks like as well. Okay, so that's the bottom part of the back, so banana plugs can go in here, or it's got, I don't know what these things are actually called, whether they're just called spades or what. So it can take either one of those, and yeah, just up the top there's the label for it, Rogers Compact Monitor British High Fidelity 8 ohms, rated at 50 watts, speech and music, made by Rogers, London, England. Well, they don't make them like this anymore. Well, they do, but there's not too many speaker manufacturers around that do make them like this anymore. Yeah, so I've just been having a quick look at what these capacitors are. So they are Reefer PHE series mini prints, I think they're called. But yeah, they're film capacitors. So basically I'm not going to fiddle around with those, they should be fine. So there are no electrolytics whatsoever inside of this thing. So that's really encouraging. Yeah, so just coming back to the sound on these, I've mentioned that I really love them because of their British sweet sort of a sound. The only thing that I would say is if you've got a fairly sort of like colouring sort of system, then that colouring, like colouring through an amplifier and then colouring through speakers and so on, it can get to the point where the colouring becomes too much. So I was listening to these with my Leek Stereo 70, which is a fairly colourful sort of an amplifier as it is already. So a British amplifier adding warmth, for example, or a valve amplifier adding warmth, driving a set of speakers like this that are in themselves quite warm also, you can end up with something that's very warm. Again, if that's what you're looking for, that's fine, but it can end up to be a little bit too much. And that's what I found, is that most things I really liked the way that they sounded, but some things, especially like audios, it'd be kind of like a little bit like hand over the mouth, you know, a little bit kind of like this sort of sound in the way that things would sound, and it'd be really noticeable, especially on some kinds of voices, for example. So that was part of the reason why I went looking for a better set of speakers for my main music system and ended up with the JBL 4333As, which I'm sure you'd agree are really a huge leap forward from these, but I still really like these speakers. So thank you so much for joining me with looking at these speakers. If you want to support these kind of videos, you might consider becoming a Patreon. I'm so thankful to my patrons for their support. You can also help me a lot by liking, subscribing and sharing, and I love to read your comments, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video. Bye for now.